All right, so I forgot my webcam, so I've stacked up boxes here. Hopefully this will work and you can hear me, I hope, if you're watching the YouTube live stream. So we need to talk about new products today. So before I start, just a reminder, on Thursday, you have class time, so we will not meet either on YouTube or live in class, because on Thursday you will have that time to work on the second exam. It'll be similar in structure to the last exam. So you'll have class time. I will have it up by class time on Thursday, and you will have 1 week to complete the exam. So from Thursday to Thursday, but I'm giving you class time to do that in case you want to do that. Or you can sleep in and work on it some other time, but you have class time to do that on Thursday. It'll cover everything through new products, which we'll get through today. So, new products. Companies need to constantly be developing new products to remain competitive. And some scholars suggest that companies need to be working on 25 or more new products at a time. Now, I say this, and I say this with a caveat, because I think if you have a small business, like a mom and pop convenience store, for example, I mean, I don't know how many new products you can be working on, obviously, and I mean, maybe you need to be looking at new products to bring into your convenience store, but in reality, those kinds of businesses, are not going to be working on a lot of new products. So when they say things like this, I think generally what they're thinking about are large companies that are developing new products. For example, drug manufacturers obviously need to be looking at new products constantly because new illnesses, as has been highlighted by the COVID-19 crisis, pop up, and we have to deal with that. And there are obviously existing illnesses that you find better and more efficient ways of combating them. So there is, to this day, no HIV vaccine, and there's no HIV cure, but there are products and drugs that now control, right, the virus. And there are prophylactics that you can take. And those are obviously, new products in developing. And ultimately, I think, the drug companies would like to come up with a vaccine and ultimately a cure for HIV. There actually is, I take that back, there actually is a cure for HIV, but it's a radical treatment. There's the second person on Earth to have been cured of HIV. It involves bone marrow transplants from people. There are a certain number of people who are HIV resistant, apparently, to the virus, and they can do a bone marrow transplant, but it's a radical and highly experimental process at this time. So when we think about this, I mean, I realize that a lot of companies are not like that. They're not involved in bringing out new drugs. They're mom and pop stores. In my own business, or one of my own businesses, my family business, I'm not sure how many, different ways you can sell bed and breakfast packages, right? I mean, we try to come up with new dishes and things like that, but in reality, it's not a product that lends itself to an enormous amount of innovation. And I'm trying to see if there's anybody that's live streaming. If you are, it looks like there are 14 people that are live streaming. Can you let me know if you can hear me? Just send me a text. I would appreciate it. Thank you. Since I didn't bring the external camera. So when we think about new product development, we need to think about the classification of products and services. So that's going to largely determine, great, thank you. Awesome. And that's going to determine how you develop products and bring them to market, what types of products and services they are. So when we talk about the product classification of the 4 Ps, so we organize the field or the domain of marketing around product, price, place, and promotion. And when we talk about the product aspect of it, we really mean both tangible goods and also services, right? So it's not necessarily just tangibles. So the way you develop these is going to depend on whether or not it's a good or an intangible like a service, and then what type of good or service it is, right? So it can also be ideas. We're going through an election currently, and in the political marketplace, bless you, in the political marketplace, we have 2 candidates that are competing for your vote, which are basically the currency of the political marketplace. And they're offering different ideas about which way the country should go in terms of vision for the future, right? So it can also be ideas. When we talk about tangible goods and services to a certain extent, we can think of products as being divided into different types of products. And the way we market those or develop those is going to be different depending on what type they are. So are they convenience products? And what is a convenience product? Well, a convenience product is something that you find everywhere. They're not, high risk generally purchase, and you can buy them in lots of places and lots of different locations and lots of different modes. So Coca-Cola, right? One of the staples of sort of American culture, a company that is in many respects ubiquitous with a lot of holidays and celebrations, and it's used in a lot of different things. It's used as a mixer, right? It's used as just a beverage that people drink. You can get Coca-Cola at the convenience store. You can get Coca-Cola in the vending machines. You can get Coca-Cola at the grocery store, right? And so it's a convenience product. It's not high risk. It's not something that we think a lot about. And it's not a high cost product. Then there are shopping products. These are products that we do spend more time thinking about. When we think about that consumer behavior, the rational actor theory that we talked about in terms of recognizing that you have a need, then going through thinking about how you're going to either satisfy that need by doing more research or what you've already know about, all the way through product evaluation. Shopping products are generally the ones that we think that take more time, right? If you're looking for furniture for your house, that's a shopping product. It's going to be a larger purchase, greater risk. It's not something that you just, if you get a can of Coke and halfway through you decide it's too sweet, you don't really like it, these are things that you're not going to be able to get rid of as easily, and so they're going to require more analysis. And of course, the development of those products is going to require more thought. Right? And then there are specialty products. These are custom ordered products. If you go to Mathis Brothers, a lot of the products that you can get, you can customize them somewhat. For example, you can look at swatches of fabric and decide, if you see a style of couch that you like, but it's not in the color that you want. In many instances, you can get it custom made or specially ordered to get the fabric that's going to fit with your decor and sort of the colors and palettes that you have in your home. And then finally, there are unsought products. And marketing unsought products is different than obviously the other category. So what's an unsought product? These are things that you generally don't think about. Some people do, I guess it's a little creepy. But most people don't think about, for example, funeral services until they have to deal with that, right? When there are people who do pre-plan their funeral. Again, I think it's a little creepy. It's sort of unsettling, but there are people who do this. Most people don't, right? They don't actually plan their own funeral. And so what do? Well, it's when Granny dies, everybody scrambles to find, the funeral home. How do you usually pick that out? It's usually the one that's closest to you. Or if you live in a small town like Guthrie, you have limited choices. You've got like 2. in the entire town that do that. Wrecker services, that's another one that is generally an unsought product. People don't have their favorite wrecker service. If you have your favorite wrecker service, I would submit to you that maybe you need to find a new car, because that's, obviously why you use a wrecker is because your car is broken down on the side of the road and you need it towed someplace. And so wrecker services are another unsought product. With regard to business products, again, the way we bring these to market or the way we develop these is going to depend on what type or category of product they are. So are they components that become part of the final product? For example, paint or steel for a car are components of the manufacturing process for automobiles. They've brought out lots of different types and new products with regard to paint in the last 20 years. About 10 or 15 years ago, I would say, one of the new paint products that they launched that didn't seem to be as catchy as many people had thought was the paint in the car that changed colors depending on what angle you were looking at it. Do any of you remember this? It could go from like a green to a purple. Anybody remember those? And I think they thought that was going to be a widely popular product. It turns out most people didn't actually like that feature or benefit. And I haven't seen a car done that way in probably the last 5 years. But that was a new product idea that they launched. That was for cars, and some people bought it. It wasn't necessarily as successful as I think they thought it was going to be. Supporting products are used to assist in the production of other goods and services. So not the actual components of the car, but things that support those production. So for example, the curing of the paint in an automobile by use of a heat source is a support product. Installation, buildings and equipment that are used in the production process. And then accessories, things like tools, office equipment that are used, paper, fax machines, telephones, are another category of business products and supplies. And then industrial services, things like repair and maintenance of the things that we use. The repair and maintenance, for example, of the copy machine down the hall is an industrial service. Legal, computing and accounting and auditing services are other products. And there are innovations and new products that are launched all the time. So for example, my brother works for Goldman Sachs. He's a vice president for Goldman. He's a tax attorney, and they offer new services, all the time. They're coming up with new insurance products, for example, or investment vehicles that you can use to invest your money. Or a lot of his products, a lot of his customers want to establish sort of charitable trust. In order to be my brother's client, you have to be worth a minimum of $50 million. And those people generally want to, a lot of them give away money to charity, and they establish trusts and things like that to do that. And so they come up with new ways. The tax code changes all the time. The tax code and the regulations are over 50,000 pages long. So if you stack, and my brother at one point in time had all of the tax code and regulations in hard copy form when he was a law student at NYU. And literally, if you stack them end to end, that tax code would go up higher than the ceiling in the United States. That tax code changes every year. Congress, writes in new deductions or takes out deductions and things like that. And so, the need for then adjustment of the kinds of vehicles that you can use for investment and the tax implications of those obviously change. And so developing new ideas and services is a big part of our economy and a big sector of wealth in this country. When we talk about new products and the launching of new products, we think about in terms of items, lines, and mixes, right? So a product item is a specific, unique stock keeping unit or SKU. What is that? That is a specific, for example, if you go to the grocery store and you're looking for green beans, and you get a can of green beans that's great value, that is a specific stock keeping unit. You could also get green beans that are made by Green Giant, right? And that would be a different stock keeping unit. Then you can think about product lines, closely related groupings of products, right? And a lot of times when you launch one product, particularly when you're thinking about computer services or computer programs, they come together in sort of a grouping or a suite of products. So Microsoft Word, Excel, and Publisher. I think they've actually done away with Publisher. I think Microsoft has actually done away with that. But that's Microsoft Office Suite, right? Those are all related. Excel helps you with accounting. Word is word publishing. And I don't know if they still support Publisher or not, but Publisher was a program that basically allowed you to develop things like advertising campaigns in a software package suite. And then product mix. That's all of the products offered by the organization. So if we think about, for example, a Walmart, what is the product mix? Well, it goes from everything from textiles, that's clothing, to jewelry and food, right? And they have a complete grocery store, pharmacy, home goods, all of those things under one roof. That's the product mix. And when we think about these things, we also think about from businesses that resell this kind of thing, what kind of breadth and depth they have in those product mixes, right? So if we compare, for example, Sam's to a Walmart and think about the difference. Sam's, like Walmart, has an enormous product breadth, right? They sell all kinds of stuff. So what does Sam sell? Well, they sell food. They sell clothing to some extent. They sell automotive. They have tires and batteries and things like that they sell at Sam's. They also sell pharmaceutical products, skincare, and things like that. But in that mix, they generally don't have the depth that a Walmart has. So if you go to Sam's and you want to buy razors, for example, they sell two types of razors, right? They sell basically a men's razor, which I believe is like the Schick, 3-blade or something like that. And then they sell Venus, right? Whereas if you go to Walmart, they not only have the breadth of the product lines that Sam's does, but they also have a lot of depth. So what kinds of razors does Sam's or Walmart as opposed to Sam's? Well, they've got the 3-blade, the 5-blade, and the Schick, the Great Value. I can't think of, Harry's. They carry Harry's razors, for example. They carry Venus. They carry a whole line of women's razors that have different, different features in terms of 3, 5, whether or not it's got sort of the lubricating strip on it versus, the more disposable, which are, don't have all of that, don't have the rotating or tilting head, right? But Sam's pretty much just has one of those or two of those. They don't have the huge depth in the product line. If you go to Sam's and you want mixed vegetables, for example, they have basically one type of frozen mixed vegetables, whereas at Walmart you'll find lots of various brands of mixed vegetables and various different combinations of mixed vegetables. Sam's pretty much carries like Asian stir-fry vegetables, and that's about it. Whereas at Walmart you can get a California medley, or you can get the Asian stir-fry, or all kinds of different varieties. So product lines, depths, and breadths are important to think about. So when we think about newness, there are various ways that we can think about whether or not a product is new. So we can view newness as relative to existing products. So is the iPhone, the most recent version of the iPhone is the 11? Is it that different than I have a 10 Is it that different? And when I went to buy the new phone, because my last phone, the battery was dying within just, a matter of hours. And so and I dropped it and the screen had cracked, and decided that it was finally time for a new phone. I was comparing the 10 to the 11. Was there that much difference between the 10 and the 11? What was the biggest difference? The camera. Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much it. But the camera on all of these is so good that it's hard to really tell the difference, right? I mean, it just didn't seem like it was worth it. And they were offering better discounts on the 10 than they were on better rebates on the 10 than they were on the 11. So I got the 10. So is the 11 really that new? Not really, right? Why does Apple do that? They cannibalize their products, and that's part of their marketing strategy. So is it revolutionary versus a modification? So in 1994, the first smartphone was introduced. It was called the Simon Personal Communication Device, and had various things that we think of in terms of being a smartphone. It had some various software. It wasn't just a phone. Before that, and this was a radical departure. Before that, what were phones? They were, cell phones were basically a phone. It was just a mobile version of what you had in your house. Like most people in the late 1980s and early 90s didn't have cell phones, right? This was a big deal if you had one, and then they went to the smart device, which was a radical because it actually had some other things besides just a phone. My first phone that I got in high school was a bag phone. It weighed like 5 pounds. The battery life on it, it would last for 12 hours on standby, which was basically it would receive calls. But if you were actually talking on it, it lasted for 20 minutes, and then you had to charge it. The batteries were nickel-cadmium batteries, which meant that you had to totally drain the battery and then charge it. Otherwise, they had kind of a memory, and it would. So if you charged it and you only used it for 20 minutes and then you charged it again, the battery life would only last that long. So then they came out with a better version. So the bag phone had this battery that you couldn't really take off. My next phone was a flip phone, and the big feature advance on that was that you could actually change batteries fairly easily. So you could totally run down a battery, and you could then have a spare battery. And the batteries themselves were pretty expensive. They were like $150 for a spare battery. But that was so much better than, having this bag phone, which once you ran it down, you had to run it down to the point where it was not, usable anymore. And then you could plug it in, and it would take about 12 hours to charge for a 12-hour battery life. Now, all of a sudden, you can change these batteries fairly easily. Well, then this personal computing, personal smartphone device comes along, and it is a radical change. Again, thinking about the cameras, when they first put a camera on a phone, I thought, God, that's stupid. Why would anybody want that? Like, that's not going to be at all popular. And of course it is. And they were horrible. The first pictures that you could take they were grainy. The resolution was really bad. Now, this device will take pictures almost as good as a professional quality, photo. So they've come a long way. So at the time, in 1994, that was a radical departure from what you had before. You can also think about newness in terms of a consumer's perspective, in terms of the degree of learning that is required by the consumer. When Apple first launched the iPhone, this required a lot of learning on the part of the consumer. It was radically different. The other smartphone devices that they had actual keys, right? Like you still had to touch, or they had a keyboard like the BlackBerry had a full keyboard on it. And this was, required a lot of learning in terms of using a touch screen device. Is it continuous innovation, which is just changes in features that require sort of no new learning, or does it require a lot of new learning? So what would be no new learning? Again, when I was a kid growing up, soap came in unless you were an industrial user, or unless you were at a restaurant or something like that. Most people, soap was bar soap, right? And then they came out with liquid soap and pumps. That doesn't really require any new learning on the part of the consumer. Soap is soap, but it was a different sort of form that didn't require any real new learning. You can have dynamically continuous innovation, where you have minor changes in behavior that are required for the product. So every time Apple launches a new update, right, it requires maybe a little bit of learning. Every time your phone updates, you'll notice some things that are slightly different, but not necessarily radically different. So I just did the latest update on the phone, and it changed the way the alarm clock, for example, works. Not radically, but it sort of has the older one, and now it's got a newer version of sleeping and waking and all this other stuff, these new features that are on the alarm clock. And then you can have discontinuous innovation, which require high levels of learning. And the example I gave here is police body cameras. This was radically different. And it required not just learning in terms of how to use the device, but police officers all of a sudden had to learn how to maybe really think about things like Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. What is that? Well, the Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures of people. Well, now you've got this device that's recording you all the time, and you can't sort of ex post facto make up, right, why you stop somebody. And so understanding how this changed, not just in terms of the learning, but also in terms of the way police had to interact with people, was a radical change in terms of the learning that was required. We can also think of newness from a legal standpoint. So the Federal Trade Commission says that you can call something new. So when you see new and improved on the packaging, what does that mean? Well, generally they say you can use that term for up to 6 months from regular distribution. Now, what constitutes regular distribution? That's subject to debate. Think about drugs, right, when they're released. What is regular distribution? Well, in drug trials, if you have a huge drug trial, is the trial date the regular distribution, or is it the point at which it becomes widely available to the public? What constitutes regular distribution is subject to some debate. Newness can also be thought about from an organizational perspective. So we can think about it from the consumer perspective. We can think about it from a legal perspective. What does the FTC say we can say is a new product? And we can think about it from organization. Is this an extension, which is just low risk and may involve cannibalization, a cannibalization risk? Now, Apple actually uses a cannibalization model. They release a new iPhone every what? It's about 18 months. Yeah, I mean, it's not quite every year, but it's about every 18 months they release a new product. And their idea is that they know that they're going to cannibalize their old products, right? That's the whole idea. The whole idea is that we got to get you to buy the newest, latest, and greatest thing. And to some extent, it works. I mean, people want whatever is the hot new model of iPhone. Unless you're like I am, and I just don't really care that much because there's just not that much of a difference. But lots of people who are committed Apple, I have friends that are like this. They are committed Apple, customers. They have the MacBooks, they have the iPhones, everything is Apple, Apple, Apple. And they always run out and buy the latest and greatest when it comes out, new product. Is there a significant innovation? So going from a phone to having a smartphone and then having a camera on the phone, obviously those are significant innovations. At this point, though, is the camera that significant? Again, when they first released the first phones with cameras, that is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Who's going to want that? Well, it turns out a lot more people want it than I would have thought. And of course, this was before the social media really got popular. And now social media, everybody uses their camera to post on social media and upload their photos, and that makes it just so much easier than what you had before, right? It's to share in terms of sharing all of this stuff. So that was a significant innovation. Is the camera from the 10 to the 11 significant? Not really. Then you can have brand extensions. So Google starts out as a technology company, but it is a web-based technology company. And then they decided that, hey, maybe we should get into the smartphone business. And so it's still within the tech field. They launched the Google Pixel phone, right? So that's a brand extension. And how much risk does that involve? Well, that's significant because although it's technology, has Google's Pixel been all of that successful in terms of competing with the Apple iPhone? Not really. You'd think that they would be a significant competitor. Everybody uses Google. Most people, there were other search engines out there besides Google that have not largely lasted in terms of their popularity. So you think that this would be something that would be wildly popular, considering that everybody is fairly committed to Google and a lot of their products. But in terms of their phones, I'm not sure that it's been just the overwhelming success that they had thought it would be. So what causes a product to either succeed or fail? Most companies fail. The vast majority of companies fail within the first 5 years, something like 90%. And the same is true of new products. The vast majority of products come out, they launch, and they're not overwhelmingly successful. And even big companies, and again, I've talked about this before, New Coke is an example of this. And they did almost everything right in terms of what we would say you should do in terms of the protocol to launch a new product, and New Coke was just wildly unpopular, just was not very successful. But what is the protocol that's going to ensure more or greater degrees of success? First of all, you have to have a well-defined target market. So you have to understand the market, and you have to understand what your target market is. Lots of businesses, particularly small to mid-sized businesses, project their desires onto a greater degree of the population than is probably going to like the product. Just because you like QB dolls, for example, doesn't mean that everybody's going to like QB dolls, and you're probably not going to be successful unless you understand that there is an actual market for that. So having a well-defined target market rather than just sort of projecting. Specifying customers' needs, wants, and preferences. Understanding the consumer is critically important. Now, again, there are lots of companies that on the other end don't do these things. Apple under Steve Jobs didn't do any of this. He didn't care what your needs, wants, and preferences were. Steve Jobs' attitude was, I know what's cool, I know what you're going to want before you know it, and I'm going to tell you what it is that you want. And he was largely successful at it. It helps if you are sort of a genius in that respect, but most people are not. And then how will your product satisfy those needs, wants, and preferences of consumers? And things that we think of as being wants, there's a difference. If you need something as opposed to wanting it, there are lots of things that people may want It may be attractive in an idealized world, but people can't afford it. Cell phones are an example of that. I think that they've crossed the line from being a want. When I was a kid growing up, I was like the first one in my high school to get a cell phone. That was a huge deal. Now my nephew, who is 8 years old, has a cell phone, right? And it's just not that big of a deal. I don't think that cell phones are necessarily much of a want anymore. I think they've really become, in many respects, much more of a need, right? Because landlines have sort of died. And so, you really sort of have to have one of these. Now, do you have to have an iPhone? No. That's sort of a want. But I think cell phones have crossed the bridge from going from what was maybe lots of people wanted it, but people were not really willing to pay that much money. Back in 1989 and 90, when I got my first cell phone, the amount of money that it cost to buy one. But I think they've now become more of a need. So why would you have a failure? An insignificant point of difference. Again, using Apple, now they have convinced everybody that there is a significant difference between the 10 and the 11. I'm not sure that that's the case. At some point in time, I think that cannibalization strategy will start to fail because there will become less and less significant points of difference. There was a radical difference, for example, between the early versions of the iPhone in terms of the camera, the quality of the pictures that it would take. From the first iPhone to, say, the 5 was a radical departure. But at some point in time, how much faster, for example, when they say that the processing speed is faster on the iPhone 10, on the iPhone 11 than it is on the 10, what does that really mean? Do we really notice a difference? Do you notice a difference in terms of the speed of processing? At some point, computer processing speeds, we're getting faster and faster and faster, but is that really that big of a deal? Again, thinking back, and most of you, again, won't remember this, but in the early age of the web, it took a long time you'd go to a website and it could take, this is going to seem horrible to you. It could take several minutes, depending on how much content was on that website. It could take several minutes for that web page to load on your computer. It doesn't take any time for websites to load now because of the processing speed. But at some point, is that, the fact that it takes, 1/1000th of a second less time to load, is that something that you're actually going to notice? Probably not, right? It's probably, is 5G, they're hyping this, is it going to be that much more radical than 4G in terms of your overall experience in using the product? I'm not sure that it is. You can also fail because you have no economic access to buyers. So, for example, many consumer packaged goods may be great. There may be a market out there, but you don't have an economical access to buyers. There are several companies here in Oklahoma that I think are really good quality products. And the story of how they became national product brands and launches is really kind of remarkable. So there's a product called Maria Ray's brand of salsa and chips, and they're manufactured in Enid, Oklahoma. And how she got into Walmart is really kind of an unheard of success in terms of you wouldn't be able to do this today, right? She wouldn't be able to have the same success if she was just launching her products today. So her name is Mary Boothman. By the way, she's a UCO graduate. She started Maria Ray's. She and her husband had moved to California, and they moved back to the Enid area when they needed to take care of their aging parents, right? So they moved back to Oklahoma. And her whole story, she came and talked to my classes a couple of times. Her whole story is a story of, I don't think I want to do that, and her husband talking her into it. So it starts out with, they moved back from California and they couldn't get any Mexican food in Enid that was comparable to the Mexican food that they got in California. And this is not atypical. Every sort of area has differences in their Mexican food. So for example, I grew up in northern New Mexico, and New Mexico Mexican is very different than Tex-Mex. And it's very different than California Mexican. One of the things that makes New Mexico Mexican different, and that I prefer, is there's a heavy reliance on, when you have enchiladas, for example, in northern New Mexico, it doesn't come with this sour cream sauce all over it. I have no idea where this originated from, but people in this part of the country will just seem enamored with this runny white crap that's all over the enchiladas. In New Mexico, enchiladas are served either with red or green, and they're made with, and the red or green come from Hatch chili, Hatch, New Mexico. So, and again, people look at the Hatch chili and they think that it's an Anaheim chili. It's not. It was a specific chili cultivar that was developed at where I got my PhD, New Mexico State. And in fact, all of our stats courses, because it's such a popular thing, the stats professors all came out of the agriculture college at New Mexico State, because that's where their big research domain is in agriculture at New Mexico State, like most state schools. And so there were all of these examples in all of our stat series that involved chili pod cultivars. And I would say, can we have an example that relates to business? And the stats professor would go, no. And he would give us another chili pod cultivar stat example. So it's either red or green. It's Hatch chili. And there's almost no use of cilantro. That's another thing. Like that's very Tex-Mex or California or something else, right? So they decided that they wanted to start this Mexican restaurant. Her husband said, we should start a Mexican restaurant. She said, I don't think we should do that. Restaurants are notoriously, great way to go broke. And they started this restaurant and it became very successful, and people started asking them if they could buy their salsa that they made. And her husband said, you know what we should do? We should start bottling this salsa and selling it. And she said, no, I don't think that we want to do, we can't, food production going from, I didn't want to start a restaurant and now you want to go into, commercial production of the salsa. I don't think I want to do that. Well, they got really lucky. There was a company that was at that time still locally owned called Pierre Foods in Enid, which is a food manufacturer. And they went and visited them and they sort of helped them learn about how to bottle. Well, once you get the manufacturing done, then you still have to get it into the store. Most people can't get into the store because they have to pay slotting fees. And this is where the no economic access to resources comes in. You can have great salsa, but if you can't get it into the store, at that point in time, Walmart managers actually had some control over what they would allow on their shelves. And they were allowed to source local products. And she convinced the local Walmart that they needed to carry her salsa, and it got into the store. And as a result, it's now carried in Walmarts nationwide. The same thing happened with, there's a barbecue, which I think, by the way, is probably the best barbecue sauce in the nation. And I like barbecue. I've tried a lot of barbecue, but I think some of the best is made here in Oklahoma. It's Head Country barbecue. Again, they were very lucky at the time that they started. They could get into a Walmart. You could get local Walmarts. And I'll never forget, I literally broke out crying when I saw Head Country was carried in the Walmart in Las Cruces, New Mexico, because I was having my mother ship it to me. when I was in the doctoral program, and when they started actually carrying it, it's now shipped and carried nationwide. But a lot of times that's not possible. If you want to get into Walmart now, you have to go to Bentonville, and you have to go through their buyers there, and they require slotting fees, and a lot of people don't have that ability to do that. They don't have the economic access to do that. You can have an incomplete protocol. So I use Cliff Hudson as an example here. One of my colleagues and I used to do product testing, and she used to do one of the products that we tested for was for Sonic. And we would do these tests. We used UCO students for a lot of these product tests at one point in time. And she would go present the findings, and he would say, I think we ought to try margarita cherry slush. No, that's not what we tested. Like, why do you think that? Well, because I think that's what I would like. Well, again, you're projecting your own desire on the public as maybe not going to be the most wildly successful thing that you can do. A lack of satisfaction of critical factors. Why is it that the Google Pixel maybe has not been as successful as the iPhone? Well, because there's not a lot of difference, right? And there's a switching cost. People they know what the iPhone is. They bought the iPhone for several generations, and so there's not a critical factor difference. I was thinking about switching from the iPhone to the Galaxy at one point in time. I think I told you all this story before, and at that time, the Galaxy had just come out with a new idea, which was you could share data by tapping one Galaxy to another. And I thought that's really cool. And I went to like 4 different stores, and they never could get it to work. And then, of course, Apple comes out with something that's even better, which is the AirDrop feature, right? And so there's not a big difference in terms of these critical factors, things that you might want. Bad timing. You can have a great product, and if you launched your product, say, in March of 2020, what happened? Well, an unexpected worldwide pandemic happened, and people weren't able to go to the store, right, and buy. I mean, you went to the store for very short periods of time and kept it to yourself. And if you launched a product then, it probably was not going to be an overwhelming success, just because people weren't going out and buying stuff, right? And if you can't hold on until the market comes back, you can be a victim of bad timing. Poor quality. I use Microsoft Vista as this. You all don't even remember Vista because you're too young, but Microsoft is infamous for releasing really crappy software. And we still use it because they've got 90% of the market, really bad software, and lots of people just absolutely, Vista was so bad, people just absolutely waited. They did not upgrade their software until they went past Vista. So poor quality, lack of market attractiveness. You can have a market that's just too small. This one is becoming less of a factor in some instances because of the World Wide Web and the ability to disintermediate. So, I always say, like, Cupid dolls, everybody likes Cupid dolls, but, because of the World Wide Web and now your ability to reach people, you might overcome this because you just have access to a wider number of consumers, whereas before, if you had a Cupid doll store, it was, probably limited in geography, and there was probably not enough people to support it. And then poor execution of the marketing mix. This involves poor execution of everything from the product to the advertising campaign that you use to launch it, to the logistics and how you get that product to market. So what leads to success, or what increases your chances of success? Well, there are 7 steps, and StageGate provides for a formal evaluation of each stage in the product development process to determine whether you should proceed to the next stage or you should cut bait and run. So I'm using a term from fishing. For those of you who are fisher, men or women, you know what cut bait and run means. My brother likes to fly fish. I've never gotten good at this. I'm more likely to put somebody's eye out than to be able to do it. But my brother's really good at this. And flies are enormously expensive. So he ties a lot of his own, but you have a lot invested if you're tying your own flies because it takes time to tie flies or it's expensive to buy them. So you get your line caught on something. How long do you sit there and work it before you basically just cut and lose the lure and run, right? So should you go on to the next stage or should you cut bait for them? So step one, strategy. Define the role and how it will fit with your overall objectives. So this combines your SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, with an environmental scan to think about how you're going to fit this in the market. In 2016, one of the candidates for president in the Republican Party was a woman named Carly Fiona Rhea. And her claim to fame was, I was a business executive, I know how to run a company. Yeah, Carly, you damn near bankrupt Hewlett-Packard and really ran it into the ground. And a big part of that was because she didn't really understand when she started expanding. It was very popular to engage in mergers and acquisitions at that point in time. She didn't really understand what the core objectives of Hewlett-Packard were and how difficult it would be to sort of do some of the things that she wanted to do. So just because there's a market for something, if you don't have the ability, the technical capability to take advantage of that, you may not want to go any further. So if it's not within your strengths, you might consider that. Idea generation. Where do you get ideas? Sources for ideas come from employees. So your sales force is oftentimes a really good source of ideas because they're out there listening to customers. They're the ones that are actively engaged with both customers and oftentimes distributors and other people that are going to give you an idea of where the market is going. Employees. So 3M, one of their employees came up with an adhesive that wasn't particularly adhesive. 3M is known as an adhesives manufacturer. That's largely what they do. And they're pretty successful at it. When I was a kid and I got braces, it took something like, when I got my set of braces, it took, I think, 3 hours to apply a full set of braces because they had to prep the tooth, which means they dried the tooth off, they cleaned it, dried it, and then they put the glue or the adhesive, which was manufactured by 3M, on the bracket, and then they stuck it to your tooth, and they had to hold it there for like 3 minutes to get it to stay, right? You got a whole lot of teeth, and this takes a whole lot of time, right? 3M came out with a product that was radically different. So probably all of you, when you got your braces, and I imagine most of you went through this torture of getting braces, it probably took half the time, probably took 90 minutes or less, because 3M came out with something called Light Cure, which was they put the adhesive on the tooth, they put the bracket on, and they hit it with an ultraviolet light. Some of you are shaking your heads yes, and that cures it instantly, right? And so the bracket is stuck there. So, and you need really good adhesives for braces because this is now, they're going to put wire in there and it's going to be under tension. And in order to get that bracket to stay, it's going to have to be really adhesive cement, right? There's an employee at 3M who comes up with an adhesive that's not terribly adhesive. But he did notice that if you stuck 2 pieces of paper together, you could pull them apart without tearing them. And so they started making these little, 3x5 pads with this adhesive on it, and Post-its were born. So employees are methods are oftentimes sources of new ideas. Research and development, formal labs. So in the drug industry, for example, they identify, diseases come out, COVID comes out, and they start actually going through and developing specific, trying to come up with vaccines and things like that, or cures to deal with things like the COVID pandemic. Step 3, screening and evaluation. Just because you have a great idea, consider your technical feasibility. The company that I worked for, we developed learning management systems, and a lot of times I'll never forget my boss. I was responsible for going through RFPs and making sure that we meet the RFP. And my boss had wanted to submit an RFP for a whole bunch of titles at the school district that we didn't have. And I went in and I said, Jeff, we don't have these titles. You're saying that we can do this. And he used an expletive. Expletive numbers live on the edge, is what he said to me. And I'm like, okay, I hope we can deliver on this if we win this RFP. And it turned out through some miracle of God, we did manage to develop the titles in the amount of time that we said we could do it. But do we have the technical feasibility to do things like that? And then external, test your ideas on consumers. So just, can you do it? And then also, is it attractive to consumers? Then your business analysis, step 4, develop detailed financial projections. How much is this going to cost? Understanding the cost of goods sold. How much is it going to cost you to do that? And then assess your market. So engaging in cost accounting. Then development. Develop a prototype to understand whether or not you can efficiently manufacture the product. Then testing. The company I worked for, we did this. So we had, not only when we would develop new products for the LMS, new content, we would have testers that would go through. We'd have test beds that would go through and make sure that the interface, for example, was something that students could use. That it was easy to navigate, that the content was understandable, right? That it was digestible. And then lab testing, and then beta testing with consumers. So exposing the product to prospective customers, types of tests you can do. You can do standard market tests where you attempt to sell through normal distribution in a number of test markets. There are a number of cities throughout the United States that, because the demographics are so similar to the demographics of the population as a whole, they're often used as test beds for consumer packaged goods and to see if they'll be attractive in those markets. You can have a controlled test market where you contract the testing program to an outside service, such as Symphony IRI. You can do simulated testing where you replicate the use in limited areas such as shopping malls. There used to be a research company in Quail Springs Mall that did this. I can remember several years ago. I think they've moved out of Quail Springs. I'm not really sure they went, but they were testing ice cream flavors, for example. I think for Baskin Robbins, and they would recruit shoppers that were coming through to go in and actually try different flavors of ice cream. Sometimes you can't test, so it's just not feasible. So, for example, the example I give here is, how do you test for a new museum? There's a new museum that's come in the town that I was born in, which is Santa Fe, New Mexico, called Meow Wolf, and it's a really odd museum concept. So has anybody been there? Anybody been to Meow Wolf? They're actually doing this now in some other cities. So you go into the museum, and it's an entire house that's been built inside of a warehouse. And you go in, and it's actually kind of a mystery that you have to solve. So you start at the front porch, and there's a mailbox, and you read some letters, and then you go into the house, and you start looking for clues in the house. And they've hired all of these artists from across the country to participate and develop stuff, design the various sets within the exhibit. How do you test something like that? I mean, it's a completely crazy concept. Part of it is you go through a washer, you go through a refrigerator into another part, which is like an alternate universe. And that has something to do with the mystery that you're trying to figure out. I mean, how would you ever test that, right? It's not a product that you could easily submit to product testing. Which means that it's also enormously risky. Then commercialization, positioning your product, launching it and positioning it in such a way that it makes a connection in the mind of the consumer. And then are you going to have a regional launch versus a full-scale launch? Where you see things like regional launches done is in, for example, movies. Why would they not release a movie nationwide? Well, years ago, about, I guess, 10 or 15 years ago, there was at the time, it was a very controversial movie that came out, and it did not come to Oklahoma. It was called Brokeback Mountain, and it was a gay romance movie. Why did it not come to Oklahoma? Or at least initially, it was not released to Oklahoma. Oklahoma is in, the heart of a very conservative, Bible Belt area, right? And so it was initially released in New York and San Francisco and Miami and places like that, where they thought there would be a market for that. And so you see that a lot with movies. They'll release them because they're just not sure that they're going to be wildly popular. One of the Guthrie, where I live currently, has had a lot of movies actually made. They're filming the Reagan movie currently in Guthrie. But when they filmed Rain Man, part of Rain Man in Guthrie. One of the first full length, like most of it filmed in Guthrie, was another one that was a limited release. They didn't release it in places like New York. It was called My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys. And why didn't it go to New York and San Francisco and places like that? Well, it was a movie about, a rodeo cowboy, and that's probably just not a big, theme of interest in San Francisco, California. So, any questions on new products? All right, so on Thursday, you will have the class period to work on your exam, and I will see you all a week from today. So good luck, and I'll see you a week from today. You'll have a week. Once I launch, you'll have at least a week. I'll probably have it up by tomorrow, but I'm not guaranteeing that. It will at least be up by class time on Thursday, and you'll have a week to complete the exam online. It will be again on D2L and be a format similar to the last one.